And our sponsors for today's event are Marquette University Center for Peacemaking, Interdisciplinary Latin American Latinx Studies Program, Center for Transnational Justice, for Urban Research, Teaching, and Outreach. And this event is going to be recorded, so the recording can be found later on Campus Ministries YouTube page. And so just making sure if you're not speaking to mute yourselves. And Dr. Laura Matthew, who's the director of Marquette's Interdisciplinary Latin America Latinx Studies Program, will be introducing our speaker for today.
Thank you, Amanda. And I want to also give a special shout out to both Amanda Miller and especially Parisa Shirasi for hosting this and helping put everything together and making it possible for us to all be here at lunchtime. And I'm going to assume that some people are in fact behind their faces eating something. And so it seems appropriate also, since this is a talk that's going to center at least partially on food, I just want to open up by let us give thanks, right? Let us give thanks to the universe and God and Mother Earth and the delivery and truck drivers and the farmers and farm workers and the grocery store and bodega and tienda employees, all of the people and parts of the universe that make it possible for us to be healthy and feed our bodies and our souls, while we also feed our minds with this presentation that we're going to have today. I'm so delighted to introduce our speaker, who is Dr. Christine Hippert from the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse. She is a professor of anthropology in the Department of Archaeology and Anthropology there. She's been on the faculty there since 2007, and she teaches a really wide range of courses, but they focus on the anthropology of food and medicine, linking this to culture change and social and economic and racial justice, as well as a variety of courses in Latin American and Caribbean studies. She's worked all through the Americas, in Bolivia, in Mexico, in various parts of the United States, and most recently, this is what she'll talk with us about today, in the Dominican Republic. This is applied anthropological research looking at how people's experience of, and I'm going to sort of put my own spin on this, and then Christine can tell us whether or not I've done a good job. What I find really fascinating about Dr. Hippert's work is she takes these big issues of colonialism and globalization and enormous food supply chains, and she brings them down to this really granular and local level to help us think about how food, what we eat, how we access it, how much we get, how we get it, how all of this intersects with our personal and collective identities, having to do with things like race and gender and nationality and class. So with that, I'm really pleased to give the floor over to Dr. Hippert. Her latest book is called Not Even a Grain of Rice, Buying Food on Credit in the Dominican Republic, and she's going to take us to a place on the northern part of the island, the half of the island that is the Dominican Republic, called Cabarete, which is an important international tourism hub and also a place where a lot of migrant labor comes. So Dr. Hippert, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. We're really looking forward to your presentation, and just take the time you need, and then after that, then I'll come back and we can have a Q&A.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Matthew. Can everybody hear me? Great. Good. Thank you so much for that really thoughtful introduction. I'm really so delighted to be here with the Marquette community to talk about my new book that came out. I want to start off by talking about the fact that I wrote this book in order to teach with it. The audience of this book is essentially undergraduates. So the main theme of the book is that I look at the cultural practice of buying food on in-store credit, what in the Dominican Republic is called fiao as the noun, or fiar as the verb, like to give in-store credit. And I look at this cultural practice in order to show what it tells us about really complex issues like race and racism and gender and basically inequality, like Dr. Matthew said, in this place that is just rife with inequality because it's an international tourist destination. I wrote this book specifically to help instructors talk about these larger issues in classes on food and community development, any classes that you have about specific household economics. All of my courses are approved for the nutrition minor on campus and public health majors. So for those of you who are from disciplines or interdisciplinary disciplines like that, my book I think would be really helpful in those kinds of courses. I also talk quite a bit about qualitative methods, what it's like to not only, work with words, but also work in places with inherent inequality. So at the end of my presentation, if anybody wants to hear more about the reflexivity that I wrote about in doing field work in a place where essentially I was asking a lot of people about hunger and debt. Those are two issues that, in polite company in the United States, unless you know somebody really, really well, it's difficult to talk about these issues. And it was difficult for me to talk about those issues as well with the people that I worked with. This book is great. I hope it works really well for classes and courses that really do a deep dive into gender, race and racism, and also tourism in Latin America and the Caribbean. There are a lot of disciplines that think that tourism is a really important component of international development. And I think that my book counters that to show you that, the people on the ground that are working in the tourism industry don't really benefit from tourism. They're actually, they're kept poor. Each chapter in my book, I have a preface, an intro, 4 chapters, and a conclusion. And each one of those, besides the preface, starts with a story. I'm a storyteller. I love telling stories in my classes. And so in order to sort of situate us in Cabarete in the Dominican Republic and in my work, I'd like to read the story that prefaces chapter 4. The name of the chapter is called "The Door is Always Open Until It Isn't." And all of the stories that I use at the beginning of each chapter sort of depicts some of the arguments and the issues that come up in the rest of the chapter. So the name of this chapter is "The Door is Always Open Until It Isn't: The Hidden Labor of Becoming Gente Responsable." And in Spanish, Gente Responsable means responsible people. So on October 3rd, 2014, I wrote this. Pepe's Corner Store is in the heart of the Callejon. The Callejon is the neighborhood where I do my work, one of them. Located at a major intersection where a side road forks, serving people living on both arteries running through this residential district. His is one of the most popular colmados, and a colmado is a bodega or a little corner store. His is one of the most popular colmados in the Callejon, and arguably one of the most frequented in all of Cabarete. Even when I first started working in Cabarete, it was easy to spot Pepe, a 60-year-old Dominican man and a lifelong resident of the Callejon, who typically worked shirtless, with salt and pepper, short cropped hair, and a wide smile. "I've lived here long before the Callejon was as big as it is now," he explained. He lives nearby the colmado, and each day I often found him sitting outside or across the street from the store in the requisite white plastic chair, so ubiquitous throughout the Dominican Republic. Interestingly, Pepe infrequently works inside his colmado. The only time he was seen working in the colmado was when he butchered animals made to order for customers, a role he saw fit for only himself, or sometimes to go over the purchase orders from distributors or accounts of customers' debt. Those who typically worked behind the counter and at the register were young men in their late teens, like Manuel, a 19-year-old single Dominican and lifelong resident of the Callejon, who was working this morning when I arrived at 7:15. Along with Manuel, this morning Pepe was in the colmado too. When I arrived, he was in the later stages of butchering a chicken for a customer who had made the order by phone. After finishing the meat order, Pepe gestured to me in pure Dominican fashion, with lips scrunched up to the side of his face, a quick nod of his head, and eyebrows raised, like this. First looking at me and then over to the plastic chairs outside the colmado. We made our way over, across the road about 15 meters away from the colmado, to sit in the shade and talk. My questions for him today were all about how and why he allowed particular customers to buy food on credit. "The door is always opened for responsible people," said Pepe. "You know, those who I know will pay me. I've heard this phrase, siempre la puerta está abierta, or the door is always opened, often from other shopkeepers as they talk to or about their most trusted customers. Pepe means this metaphorically and perhaps a bit literally as well, since colmaderos or shopkeepers are known to get phone calls in the middle of the night from customers needing emergency supplies. I need these customers. I have debts, you know. If these responsible people don't shop here, they'll shop somewhere else. I would be ruined. I work hard to keep the door open for them. In response, I asked him, when is the door not open for someone? How do you know when someone will pay you back? Ah, yes, the door closes, that's for sure. Así, la puerta se cierra, es cierto, Pepe replied. I can't give everyone credit. If I did, I can't pay my own debts because there are lazy people here, those who don't work, and they are thieves and wouldn't pay me back. But what about people who only work during the tourist seasons? Are they lazy? Do you allow them to buy on credit when there are no tourists? I asked. Well, my friend, yes, this is a problem. For these people, they are responsible people when they are able to be. But more than anything, I'm talking about the Haitians. I can't trust them. So you mean like Joel and Esther? How about Robe? It appears to me that you lent the Haitians quite a bit. I pushed him. Well, yeah, I do. But they're not like other Haitians. Like who? What do you mean? I asked. Well, I suppose they, like Joel, Esther, and Robe, have become gente responsable. They prove that to me, was Pepe's explanation. Are Haitian customers the only ones who are not responsible, who fail to pay their debts? Do Dominicans do that too, or is it just Haitians? I asked. No, you're right. There are Dominicans too, conceded Pepe. The door is always open, Christina, until it isn't, you know? Whoops. So let me talk to you about the goals of the book and about, and these are the goals that I'm going to take us through for the next half an hour or so, talking about my research. So the first goal of the book is I've written the book so that we can examine the ways that poor communities in neo-colonial settings, especially multicultural communities that are magnets for migrant labor, provision their households. And so there's a gendered dimension to what I mean by provisioning households that surprised me. It wasn't the sort of, you know, women-dominated narrative that I had been led to understand was sort of that, you know, casa calle split for what it meant to be a virtuous woman in the Dominican Republic. The second goal of the book is to illustrate people's experiences of race and racism in a global context. A lot of times, when I talk to American audiences about my research, sometimes they don't understand that there's actually a specific politics of identity of lumping and splitting Dominican and Haitians along different axes over who gets to be called Black and why. And so my book sort of explains the history of the island of Hispaniola related to these conceptions of the social constructions of race and also racism and how that takes root in a really multicultural environment like we see in Cabarete. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the rationale for the book and link this back to Haitian-Dominican relations. So I've got a map on the screen so you can see Cabarete. Hopefully I can point out with my pointer that the Santo Domingo, the capital of Dominican Republic, is on the southern coast, but Cabarete is on the north coast. Cabarete is a community. It's a magnet for all of these migrants, not only internal migrants from other places in the Dominican Republic, but also people from Haiti. So here's the border. Dominican Republic is about 2/3 of the island, while Haiti is 1/3 of the island. But Cabarete is also an international hub for migrant labor. So there are people that come from, you know, Sweden and Switzerland and Canada, particularly Quebec or French-speaking Canada. There are some people from the U.S. working there, but primarily, you know, there are Russians. And so you can walk down the street in Cabarete and see signs in all kinds of European and North American languages all over the place. So one of the things I wanted to talk to you about is that for centuries, there has been sort of a narrative about Haitian-Dominican relations called the fatal conflict model of Haitian-Dominican relations. And the fatal conflict model has two sort of prongs. The first prong says that there have been structural tensions between the nations of Dominican Republic and Haiti since the colonial era and the slave era. And they've been in this sort of like duking it out in this duel for power on the island of Hispaniola. Another prong to the fatal conflict model of Dominican-Haitian relations is there are tense interpersonal relations between and among Dominicans and Haitians. The issue that was sort of coming to a head in the early 2000s, made known especially by Samuel Martinez, who's an anthropologist at the University of Connecticut. In 2003, he came out with a paper that said, you know, there isn't a lot of good research in intercultural settings in the Dominican Republic. Like, we have a lot of research that says, you know, that there's a lot of anti-Haitianism and racist rhetoric between and among Dominicans and Haitians in intercultural settings. So like in neighborhoods in the Dominican Republic that are primarily populated by Dominicans, or in places called bates, which are usually a series of Haitian residents that work on sugar plantations. Or in places like Little Haiti. Little Haiti is a sort of, you know, Haitian enclave in the big city, the capital of Santo Domingo. And, you know, there had been some research being done there to say that a lot of Haitians in Little Haiti had, you know, there was a lot of tension. But increasingly, since the year 2000, there's been a lot of communities in the Dominican Republic that have been built interculturally, where there are Haitians and Dominicans of Haitian descent all living in the same place. Usually we can find these along the border, in border communities, like in Dajabon and Guanaminte, or Jimani and Pedernales in the south. But there are a lot of places like Cabarete that are far from the border, and they're this magnet for labor. And so what happens is that migrants go there and stay there. So they're not like border communities at all, whereby Haitians walk across the border, you know, sometimes daily, maybe weekly, but then go back home, right? Cabarete is a place where people leave wherever they're coming from and stay. And so it's in these intercultural neighborhoods that we didn't have a really good sense of how the fatal conflict model was playing out or not. And so my work sort of tries to fill this gap. And I saw in the work that I was doing throughout my long-term field work that food shopping in Colmados, which is the Dominican word for essentially a bodega, like I tell Americans like sort of a quick trip without the gas station, but that's technically not really what it is. It's really like a place where you can buy bulk food, but there aren't open shelves. So you can't walk into a Colmado and pick things off the shelf and put them in a basket and bring them to the counter and get them rung up. In fact, most of the canned goods are behind a counter whereby either the shopkeeper or a helper, an ayudante, pull things off the shelf for the customer. You sort of pull out bulk foods that you want from bins and get these things rung up. And so I noticed that in these Colmados that most people who worked there, who shopped there, did not shop with money. They actually shopped there more without money than with money, and it's because they were ringing up a tab. Now, I don't mean this is not a microloan because there were no interest rates at all put on these loans. These were literally just tabs, and so this is not like a credit card at all, in that there were no interest rates, and nothing is electronic. You're going to see later on in my talk that literally the customer debts, are being recorded in like school kids' notebooks with names at the top. And then when people start paying down their debt, the debts are scratched out and the new sums are scratched to the side. So I wanted to see, how does in-store credit as a cultural practice to help people buy food in a place where people are really food insecure and really in a really poor setting, how does this affect intercultural relations, you know, relations between and among Dominicans, Haitians, and people who are increasingly being called Dominico-Haitians, so people who are Dominican nationals of Haitian descent in this international tourist town. So let me talk to you a little bit very quickly about my research objectives and methods. This picture is a satellite image of the community of Cabarete. So what you'll see is these two sort of spokes on a wheel, if you will, like this horizontal spoke and this sort of bowling alley, skinny, the skinny neighborhood. Those are the places where I did my work, because those are the homes. These are the two neighborhoods where people are working in very, very low paid positions in the international tourism industry. So these are the people who are wait staff, barkeep, they're gardeners, they're maids, they're, people who are, custodians, people who are bringing, people drinks on the beach with the little umbrellas in it, right? So the long skinny community is called Callejón de la Loma, which in Spanish means Alley of the Hill, and it sort of looks like a bowling alley. And then this horizontal neighborhood over here is called La Ciénaga. In Spanish, La Ciénaga means the swamp. This is a really, really swampy place. And all along the beautiful ocean, shore line here is where all of the, sort of like medium-sized five-star hotels in resorts or in restaurants that people are working in all there. And I worked a number of years since essentially the summer of 2011, clear through the summer of 2015 in a number of field seasons, and then in an uninterrupted year-long research sabbatical. And my primary research methods were participant observation. So I participated and observed people in these communities. I lived in this community. I did archival research. Notably, I was able to look through the cuadernos, or the Fiao books that noted everybody's debt. And I did interviews with 70 shoppers and shopkeepers and distributors. Within these communities, there are about 7,000 residents, 65% Dominican, 30% Haitian, and then 5% international. And my objectives are essentially fourfold. I tried to unpack the complex process of Fiao and what it meant to give in-store credit. I tried to differentiate the variables that people use in order to distinguish what people meant by gente responsable from those who aren't responsible. I also, in my book, I revealed that all of the hidden labor that goes into giving credit and people being in debt, and I'm going to talk about that today. And I also attempted to determine whether Fiao, as a practice, moderates racism and anti-Haitianism between and among Haitians and Dominicans. So let me talk to you about Colmados. I've got a couple of photos up here to show you what a Colmado is. And Colmadero, this is Pepe actually butchering a chicken like I showed you in the story. And Christian Krohn Hansen, an anthropologist from the University of Oslo, did field work in Washington Heights, New York, among Dominican Colmados, Dominican-owned Colmados. And he said that in New York, Colmados are a total social phenomenon. In fact, what he found was that a lot of people who owned and operated Colmados in Washington Heights were actually Dominicans, people who had migrated to Washington Heights, New York, from different places in the Dominican Republic, where they worked in Colmados in the Dominican Republic before they got to New York. And he's right that not only in New York, but Colmados in the Dominican Republic are also total social phenomenon, like sort of that Mausian understanding of total social phenomenon. So like, Dominicans go to Colmados not just to buy food, but they do it because at night they turn into colmadones, which are essentially dance halls or nightclubs. They go there to, watch TV, because sometimes, soccer games or more often baseball games are on TV, and people, will sit around and watch, or they'll drink beer. Kids will go there and buy snacks on the way to school, and, sometimes, do homework in the back rooms. And Colmados are the preferred shopping venue for all, particularly working class Dominicans and Haitians, but also everybody. There are big box stores throughout the Dominican Republic, like we have in La Crosse, we have like Festival or Woodman's, Cub Foods. So there are big box stores, but big box stores are known among people as the foreign, So they carry for a lot of, for all intents and purposes, big box stores carry foreign foods. And people know that if you want to eat homegrown food or lo criollo, people need to buy food that is recognizable, that reminds them of who they are as Dominicans from Colmados. So my book talks a lot about who shops in Colmados, when and how, and what I found. My findings show that it's not just women who shop in Colmados. In fact, there are certain times of day where there are predominantly women shopping in Colmados. Colmados are not only owned by men, they are also definitely owned by women. They're not only owned by Dominicans, they're also owned by Haitians. And so I talk about what it means to come in and, shop at a Colmado. Like, people don't queue up, they don't line up. One of the really savvy things that a shopkeeper has to do is he or she has to keep in mind who came in when, and when to say, dime, or, tell me, what you want, and take everybody's orders. And so there's a lot of labor going on with shopkeepers, but Colmados are also known throughout the Dominican Republic as places that keep our bellies full. People time and again gave this phrase to me. Keeping our bellies full is not just about feeding people, but it's also labor flows through Colmados. So not only do people come shop there, not only are there shopkeepers and ayudantes, or like this little kid right here, people who help out behind the counter, but there's a whole industry in the Dominican Republic of people delivering food from Colmados. So there are motoconchos or motorcycle taxis that make deliveries, and they call it by the English word delivery. It's not para llevar, it's delivery. There's also a whole cottage industry of women making prepared foods at home and coming to different Colmados that they have agreements with the shopkeepers to sell during the high time, because the most important meal of the day is lunch. And so there are these women who go home, whom every morning will make all these prepared habichuelas or stewed beans, so that women who work outside the home can have a fresh, hot meal, right, for the people in their home at lunchtime. They don't have to spend hours, making these foods. And this keeps people employed. So when Colmados go under, and I'm going to talk about that, it doesn't just leave people without a place to shop, but it leaves people without work. So let me talk to you about what Fiao is. Fiao is an institution. It's found everywhere, and it's not just found in Colmados. So you'll see here in this photo right here, this is a muebleria. It's a furniture store, and the outside says Todo Fiao, or everything on in-store credit. And they don't really mean that, because not everybody is eligible for in-store credit at a furniture store, but I'll talk about that. This is a lottery house, so there's a state-run lottery program, sort of like, I think, Powerball in Wisconsin. And so this sign says No Fiao a Nadie. I don't give anybody in-store credit. Attention, bias, the person who runs this. But also I wanted to show you this picture in English. It says up here in the upper left corner, it says, Mr. Credit was killed by Mr. No Pay, laid to rest by Mr. No Trust. What a pity, in deep sympathy, only cash. And so the message of that sign is extremely important, right? Because it says that, credit can lead to, the dissolution, the devolving of, industry. But it also is in English. And, most local people who live in the Callejon in La Cienega don't speak English. This sign is specifically for tourists. So not everybody is eligible for Fiao. You have to sort of, pass some tests. And this is where the concept of Gente Responsable comes in. So in my research, I found that there are essentially 3 different types of in-store credit. The first type is credit given to people who are known as Gente Responsable. People will pay off their debt in a timely manner. Throughout the Dominican Republic, people have to pay off their debt every 2 weeks. It's called the quincenal. So every 15 days, you are responsible for going into a colmado. You're given a little piece of a box that says how much you owe. You go in, and very often, really Gente Responsable pay off the whole debt. But for the most part, people have to pay down their debt. And generally speaking, the typical down payment on debt is about 30%. So shopkeepers can expect a 30% down payment any quincena, right? But not everybody can do that, especially because this industry is predominantly run by tourism. And so there's this ebb and flow in the calendar of when people have work and when people are laid off. So there are other types of fiao in which people ask for gifts. So these gifts are specifically people going in and asking the shopkeeper if they can have charity. And this is often asked of women shopkeepers, almost exclusively. And women shopkeepers are pretty savvy, and they know that in order to keep and woo, attract shoppers back to their shop, they have to every once in a while give charity. But they really know that they can only give one gift per person, and they're pretty stringent on that. Then the last type of fiao is giving credit to someone who specifically is known as not gente responsable, like they don't have a job. They're known not to have a job at that time of year, or someone who is unknown to the shopkeeper. And when that happens, what the shopkeeper requires is for the customer who they don't know, or they know are not gente responsable, they have to go to a common person that both the shopkeeper and the customer know. And then that debt gets written down in the debt notebook on the known shopper's page. And that they call them a reference. So when a customer finds a reference, a person that the shopkeeper knows, and sort of it mitigates the risk to the shopkeeper by putting the debt on this other customer's tab. So if that shopper walks away from that debt, the person who's on the hook for that debt is the reference, not the shopkeeper. Because if the shopkeeper went into too much debt, then shops go under. So throughout my research, I found that there were two what I call emergent moralities of fiao. Like the way that people understand fiao is essentially bifurcated. Most people used the phrase para la dignidad, which means for dignity. So fiao is something that invokes dignity, but in two completely different ways. So most of my interviewees said, look, if it weren't for fiao, I would have no dignity. I would not be able to feed my kids. I would not have any money to pay my rent, to pay to keep my lights on, to, send my kids to school. And so fiao was this process of taking care of others. Like shoppers counted on shopkeepers to take care of them. And in doing so, showed that they trusted them and contributed to the hard work that was being done, and the shopkeeper sort of validated the hard work of the shopper in order to pay off the debt. But then there was an increasing number of people within these two communities that said, fiao is a path to dignity, but for some people, but not for everybody. And in fact, these people saw using in-store credit as cases of personal failure. They thought that the only reason why people were using in-store credit was because they were overspending, sometimes on really sort of morally unquestionable things like buying too much beer or buying cigarettes. And in fact, when people use fiao and sort of create these networks of debt by using references to take on debt, they were using a collectivist mindset, but neglecting their individual needs. And in fact, they were becoming sort of perpetually indebted, sort of referring back to colonial era, the propensity of colonial era, indebtedness, sort of in the contemporary era. So let's talk about what becoming gente responsable as a process actually means. So becoming gente responsable means to people to sort of balance the moralities of personal responsibility, collective responsibility, and care for the self and others. So using fiao was this process of building trust by vouching for other people that you could count on in times of need. So it was sort of casting a wide net. It was definitely creating a social safety net for people when the state is not creating a social safety net for people in the same way that we might think of here. I found shopkeepers and distributors, so people who were driving around in, like in this photo, right? Like this photo right here. This is a distributor. He's bringing food to shops in order to stock shelves. So shopkeepers and distributors were considered gente responsable if they allowed shoppers and shopkeepers to use in-store credit, but also shoppers had to balance their own needs, right? Their own cuentas or their own debt while maintaining good relations with other people who helped them stay afloat. So Fiao allowed people to mitigate personal vulnerability, right? And so what happened is, throughout the course of my research, I realized really quickly that everybody were borrowers and everybody were creditors, right? So I called it this borrower-creditor scenario. Like everybody was loaning, right? And, getting loans from people at the same time. And in order to sort of deal with this, there was a lot of hidden labor that went into being a borrower-creditor, right? These borrower-creditor exchanges I show in my work, I show some tables and some charts to show that they're a little more often than not intercultural lending. So more often than not, it's Dominicans vouching for Haitians and Haitians vouching for Dominicans, right? Rather than Dominicans vouching for Dominicans and Haitians vouching for Haitians. And I said that this sort of makes sense in this scenario because shopkeepers are both Haitian and Dominican. So when a shopkeeper and a shopper need to find someone in common, in order to mitigate risk, they often will find people of, the opposite ethnicity, race, nationality, heritage, whatever it's called within this context. And so there are lots of Dominicans that vouch for Haitians, lots of Haitians that vouched for Dominicans. And I also found men and women vouching for each other as well. When people are references, when shoppers are references for other shoppers, what that means is that people who are owed money need to make multiple visits to people who have borrowed money from them. I mean, I found that sometimes it took, in order to pay off 100 peso debt, which is generally speaking at that time about almost $3, right? I found that people were making up to 10 different visits to the people who borrowed money from them. And this is a lot of labor. Like, you don't just walk in and knock on the door and say, hey, pay up. You have to sit down. Very often the person feeds you a little bit, so you have to eat a meal. You have to sort of, ask about family, do all these things. And it took hours of work that, sometimes these visits only rendered about, 30% of what they're owed. So just sort of peanuts for doing all of this work. I also said that there was hidden labor to borrower creditors as far as shopkeepers were concerned. So shopkeeper had to really maintain vigilance to do their work so that their colmados didn't go into financial ruin. And in fact, there were lots of colmados that went in and out of financial ruin during my field work. And these shops were called empty. What I found was that the empty shops that are more often empty than not, because sometimes they were and sometimes they weren't, it just sort of depended on the season. What was really intriguing is that the shops who were empty gave in-store credit without requiring a reference more often. And so what that meant was that there was no one to sort of mitigate that risk for the shopkeeper. And the reason why they did that, a lot of people, the people that said that this was, overspending or overlending in sort of a personal at fault emergent morality, they would say things like, well, that was stupid of the shopkeeper to give too many loans. And the shopkeepers are like, look, I'm not stupid at all. The reason why I'm doing this is because if I don't give in-store credit, these shoppers are in the shop of last resort. They wouldn't come to my shop if I didn't give this credit. And so really, this wasn't very important to them. I found that the most vulnerable shops and shopkeepers were run by Haitian shopkeepers, usually women, right? And so you see a woman on the screen right here. This is Anna, a Haitian shopkeeper, and she really had a very empty shop. As you can sort of, I don't know if you can see in that photo, the shelves are pretty empty. And so what I found was that there was this really intricate system of food sharing and meal sharing practices. When shops go under, or when, you know, there were lots of times where shoppers would go into Colmado that have a page in their notebook for Fiao, right? But they would go in and the shopkeeper knew that they couldn't be responsable that month. And the shopkeeper said, no, you cannot have in-store credit this month. And so people would sort of forage to different, people in households where they would either get, a piece of food, like usually it would come in the form of like a, fried breadfruit, or they would get, sometimes a small full meal, definitely like habichuelas y arroz, or, rice and beans, or maybe a teensy bit of meat. Sometimes they'd get, be able to go, harvest a coconut from a mango tree or a coconut tree. And this was a very common practice. So my conclusions are that being eligible for in-store credit is a complex process that sort of revolve around axes of moralities of care and responsibility, care for others and care for the self, responsibility for the collective versus the responsibility for themselves. Often people are gente responsable in one context, right, might not be in another. And very often what I found is that people would still use racist rhetoric, like I did in the story that I shared with you, like, all Haitians are lazy. But at the same time, when I pushed them, they would say, oh yeah, I lend to Haitians all the time, or I have vouched for Haitians, or I have vouched for Dominicans. And so I found that Fiao created these really complex intercultural, systems or social safety nets in a way that you don't see anywhere else in the Dominican Republic, not only like based on like communities or cities, but I mean in like cultural venues, like places of, total social phenomenon. And but I end the book with a caveat. I say, look, Fiao is an extremely important strategy for people to provision their households, but it does nothing to decrease poverty in the region. People are perpetually, like, there is a little bit of truth to what people say when they say that, Fiao keeps people indebted, and it really makes them work really hard on the behalf of others instead of themselves. And so really, I say that I think that, if people were paid a living wage, that would go a lot further than becoming perpetually indebted. But of course, because of the strictures of international capitalism, a lot of people have their jobs because of the low wages that are maintained in the region. I wanted to show you that I'm, asking you to please order my book for class or your institution's library. And if you buy the book from the publisher within 2021, there's a special 30% discount offer if you go through the website. So I think Parisa is going to put up a flyer that I've given her that gives you this code to get to use the discount if you buy the book. Thanks so much for listening to my talk, everyone.
Thank you so much. That was a really fascinating talk. I think I'm echoing, so I'm going to turn down here and see if that helps. I'm going to open it up to everybody. I have questions, but if I start, I might take over. So you can put your questions in the chat. Can everybody hear me? I can hear myself echoing, so.
I can't hear an echo.
Okay, fine.
Yeah.
If I need to change anything, let me know. So people are welcome to just raise their hands and or just unmute yourself. That might be even faster if we have a lot of hands, or to put something in the chat and then I can relay that. Go ahead, Sonia.
Hello, thank you for the presentation. That was awesome. And I love hearing about your research. The one question I have for you, so you talked a little bit in the beginning about how you could share about reflexivity, which I would love to hear a little bit about, but also the idea of like decolonizing methodologies and using practices that are appropriate and culturally competent for the community that you're entering. And so I wondered if you could talk a little bit about like your reflexivity, but then also how you were conscious of the community you were entering to do this research.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks, Sonia, for bringing it up. So in my preface to my book, I talk about my positionalities and the intersecting identities that I have. So, I reveal that I'm a white, cisgendered, professional woman who is not food insecure. And so the way that people saw me in the neighborhoods where I worked, like, that's who I was to them. Not only that, I want to reveal that I have two sons. They were 5 and 9, and they were in the field with me while I was doing my field work, and they were going to school within those communities. So, they had, kids down the street that were playing baseball with. And so most of the time, so to reflect on my identities, one of the things that I became known as is my kid's mom. And so I had to continuously sort of remind people that I was a researcher there to do research, because they would often start talking to me about things and I wasn't quite sure, based on where the conversation was heading, that they remembered that I was a researcher. And so talking about, decolonizing methodologies, I think that we need, when we do work, wherever we do, particularly qualitative work, where, creating rapport means not just becoming friendly, because if I just became friendly with people, I don't think that I would do ethical research, in that I needed to remind people of my sort of research hat role. But let me tell you about some of the things that occurred during my work that I actually talk about in my preface, that actually get, what I want to do is, I don't want to paint myself as a hero. I actually want you all to see how complex it is to work in environments that are inherently that are just rife with inequality. So for instance, one day, I was with some middle-class friends in Santo Domingo, and we were at a Xiomara Fortuna concert. She's a fabulous, fabulous, artist. And we were all dancing and having fun. And I was with 7 other women who were all professional, sort of middle-aged women. And at one point we were dancing, and at one point this woman looked to me, my friend, and said, "I'm angry that you're even here." And she kept dancing. And I thought, wait a minute. What happens? What did I do? I'm like, do I smell? Like, what happens? And she said, "Cristina, no, it's not your fault, but I'm mad that you're even here because, you got off the plane and you spent 10 American dollars getting a visa to live here and work here." She goes, "I have spent the better part of 4 years at the US Embassy in Santo Domingo trying to get to your country to just be a tourist. I just want to go to Disney World. I just want to go to New York. I just want to go to the White House. And I have spent $160 every time I have filled out that paperwork, and I've been rejected 4 times. She's like, "I have a profession. I have a bank account. I own a home. I have a life. I have," and all of those things. And the reason why I bring those up is because those are eligibility requirements for the US Embassy, seeing people as not being sort of a risk of giving them a visa. And every time she was turned down. And I said, wow, yeah, look at the inequality in that. I've been able to come here and, do my work in your country for 10 measly bucks, and this person can't even do that. Another thing, another sort of point that I wanted to make mention of is I gave a lecture at the largest university in Dominican Republic, which is called the West. It's in Santo Domingo. And I gave it to graduate students and faculty. And I gave my hour-long talk. And at the end of the talk, a woman raised her hand from the back row. And I called on her because she looked, like she wanted to talk. And she said, "I have 5 questions for you." And when somebody says that, you're like, oh boy, here we go. But she said, "Before I ask them, I want you to know that I have relatives in your country who have been trying to regularize their status there and have been unsuccessful for 9 years." And so I bring that up to you because people see researchers through this nationalist lens as well, in the kinds of benefits that are sort of given over based on citizenship. And, you know, so all I could say to this woman was, look, I think racism in my country is abhorrent. I think that the problems with immigration are abhorrent, not only in my country, but here too. And I think that we need to sort of validate that, you know, things are problematic here. And you know, I tried to diplomatically address that. One graduate student, a man, stood up and said, the Dominican Republic is not a racist country. And then another person stood up right after that comment and said, yes, it is. You're just white and Dominican to this person, and you don't experience it like this person did because she was a person of color. And so this sort of, you know, I started a fight in the middle of my talk, but I just sort of wanted to sort of share this with my readers to let them know that in the United States, we sort of see people through these lenses of intersectionality, that when I went to the Dominican Republic, there were more lenses than even that I needed to highlight. Oh, it looks like the PDF cannot be uploaded to the chat. I would be happy to have them send that around via email if that works. But Sonia, does that help answer your question?
Yeah, definitely. There's so many complexities to international research that I don't even know because I've never done it. So thank you for sharing, and thank you for the talk. Yeah,
thanks a lot for being here, Sonia.
Other questions or comments? Feel free to drop them in the chat, or I don't know if you can see this, Christine. I'm going to read it out loud for those who aren't there. Rosita Tormala says, I heard the island was hit hard by the COVID pandemic. Do you perceive the Fiao system surviving the hit?
Yeah, this is an excellent question, and something that has been increasingly problematic for a lot of working class people who rely on tourism in order to keep themselves afloat, not only in being able to refer for others so that they're, you know, so that they can be considered gente responsable. And I have not been able to go back to the Dominican Republic during COVID, you know, for, you know, obvious reasons. And, you know, so what I've been able to do is contact people via WhatsApp and through Facebook Messenger and talk to them about how much they're indebted. And what I have found in just sort of over the past year since the book came out is that people's debt has gone up, but the percentage of how much debt they can repay every quincenal or every 15 days has gone down. And so what this means is that Colmados are, their stocks are, I mean, their shelves are not stocked so well. You know, Colmados are emptier, right? You know, shopkeepers have more debt that they owe their distributors, and shoppers have more debt that they owe their shopkeepers. And so is that a sustainable system? Absolutely not. And, you know, I sort of think about, you know, the national conversations here in the US that we're having about increasing indebtedness and sort of, you know, what indebtedness means for middle class lifestyles here in the United States with regard to like credit card debt, you know, student loan debt, you know, things like that. And how much, you know, people in the six figures having indebtedness here in the United States. What I'm finding is not six-figure debts, of course, in these neighborhoods, but people feeling like the debt is insurmountable, as if it were that much. So the question is it going to survive the hit? I wish I had my crystal ball. I really don't know, but I don't know how people are going to eat if they're not allowed to buy on credit.
I think we have time for one more question before we wrap up. I'm going to ask a question then, even though it's quite late. Can you talk briefly a little bit? I was really struck by the Haitian women who it seemed had kind of a double, and maybe they did or they didn't perceive it this way, that they were sort of doubly being taken advantage of, it sounded like, in part because of their dual identity as both Haitian and as women. But that kind of takes me to the comment. I mean, you're emphasizing the precarity, but also the kind of the survival that's embedded in the system. It could be easy to romanticize this, or also think about it in terms of building relationships and communities, which is sort of where you started, is looking at intracultural. Can you talk a little bit about that balance between, is there anything good that comes out of the system that would be lost, or just how do you see that?
Yes, absolutely. So I think that I didn't want to say that Haitian shopkeepers are doubly exploited. They can be if they allow that to happen. So I think that shopkeepers do a very good job creating, financial boundaries and say that they can only give charity in certain cases. These are the cases that they're going to do. But I see some shopkeepers, particularly Haitian women, who, go the extra mile in order to create more relationships. So for instance, I talk in the book about this one woman who's one of the most vulnerable shopkeepers in both neighborhoods, but she has started her own sort of export-import business. So every few months, she goes to Haiti and brings rice and beans and a considerable amount of other goods with her to her mom's house from the Dominican Republic. And then in her suitcase returns with all kinds of Haitian goods that people can't find in Cabarete, particularly like black mushrooms to have diriac, jonjon, or these different things that, people really want to be able to purchase. And, she says things like, there are a lot of Haitian, when you talk about intercultural, there are a lot of Haitian shoppers who will come to me and say, oh, please bring back, black mushrooms with you so that I can make this signature dish from the North Shore and do all these things. The Haitian shop, her name is Anna. Anna will say, okay, won't ask for any money up front. She brings these goods back. She goes to deliver them and they say, I can't pay you right now, or I can only pay you a little bit. And so she has to do all of this hidden labor, right? Of, going back to these families. And in doing that, they create relationship, right? Even though it takes her away from her shop and, the monetary, the making money that she needs to make. But people, Dominicans do this of Haitians too. Haitians do this of Dominicans too. And I think that these, like the foragers, the people who are going from house to house, asking for, meal sharing and food sharing, I think if Fiao was eliminated, I think that sort of relationship building through those visitations, those multiple visitations, I think would be lost. And yeah, that's what I want to say about that.
Thank you. It's so complicated.
Yeah.
So complicated to unravel. Well, I see that it is 1:03, and so I think it's time for us to wrap up. I want to thank Dr. Hippert again for taking the time to be here with us and share this fantastic and really thought-provoking work. So everybody can do another hand clappy thing, as you will. Thanks. And thank all of you for attending. And thanks very much again to the Center of Peacemaking and Soup with Substance for hosting us. It's been a great talk, and we look forward to the next event.
Thanks a lot, everyone. Take good care.
Everyone take care.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.